The old man's breath rasped in his chest, a rhythmic counterpoint to the whine of machinery that permeated the cramped habitation module. I watched him from the corner, half hidden in the shadows. The light from the monitor cast his face in a green pallor, highlighting the network of burst blood vessels on his cheeks and nose. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that ended in a wheeze. "You're here," he said, not bothering to turn. He knew it was me. "Yes, sir." I stepped forward, my boots scuffing against the metal grating. "The exterior sensors have picked up an anomaly. An object approximately 20 meters in diameter, buried beneath the ice sheet, 5 kilometers west of the main shaft. Metal content. High, consistent with a spacecraft hull." The old man's fingers twitched on the armrest of his chair. He had been the colony's director for as long as I could remember, a relic of a bygone era when corporations dreamed of mining the outer reaches of the solar system for profit. Those dreams had long since soured, leaving us stranded in this frozen wasteland, scraping out a meager existence from the methane geysers that erupted from Charon's icy crust. "We don't have the resources for a dig of that magnitude, sir," I said. "We're barely meeting our quota as it is." "The company won't care about our quota if this is what I think it is," the old man replied. "They've been looking for something like this for decades. If we can bring it in—" His voice trailed off, but I knew what he was thinking. A windfall, a chance to escape this rock and return to Earth. A fantasy. "I've already dispatched a team to the site," I said. "They'll confirm the find and transmit the data back to base." "Good, keep me apprised." I nodded and turned to leave, the old man's labored breathing filling the cramped module. The wind howled across the ice sheet, driving particles of frozen methane into my faceplate. The sky was a canvas of black velvet, studded with the cold fire of distant stars. I paused for a moment, gazing up at the looming bulk of Pluto, its pale surface illuminated by the faint light of the sun. Out here on this frozen moon, it was easy to feel insignificant, a speck of dust clinging to a spinning ball of ice. Yet the old man's words lingered in my mind. A spacecraft, buried beneath the ice, a relic of a civilization that had ventured into the unknown. What secrets did it hold? What dangers? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. Our lives were about to change, and not necessarily for the better. The crunch of my boots on the crystalline ice was a lonely sound in the vast expanse. The wind shrieked a mournful tune, a constant reminder of Charon's lethal embrace. I pressed on, following the phosphorescent markers towards the excavation site, each step a jarring impact against the unforgiving ground. The dig site was a hive of activity, a harsh spotlight cutting through the darkness. Figures bundled in heavy protective gear swarmed around a massive pit in the ice, their movements jerky and mechanical in the low gravity. A cacophony of sounds assaulted my ears, the grinding of drills, the hiss of hydraulics, the shouted commands barely audible over the wind. I made my way to the edge of the pit and peered down. The spacecraft was partially exposed, a dark metallic bulk jutting out from the ice like a half-buried corpse. Its hull was smooth and featureless, save for a series of glyphs carved into the metal. "Any progress?" I asked the foreman, a grizzled veteran named Griggs. He shook his head. "We've breached the outer hull, but the inner chamber is sealed tight. We're trying to cut through." "Keep at it," I said. "The director is eager for results." Griggs grunted and turned back to his work. I watched for a few more minutes, the scene playing out in the harsh glare of the floodlights like a macabre ballet. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. We were meddling with something we didn't understand, something that had lain dormant for who knows how long. As if to confirm my fears, a tremor ran through the ice, causing the men to stumble. I grabbed hold of a support beam to steady myself. A low rumble came from the depths of the pit, followed by a sharp cracking sound. A section of the spacecraft's hull gave way, revealing a gaping abyss of darkness. I had seen death in many forms on this forsaken moon. But this was different. This was the unknown. The abyss staring back at us. "Evacuate the site!" I yelled, my voice barely audible over the rising din. Get everyone clear! Men scrambled out of the pit, their movements clumsy and panicked. I joined the exodus, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the edge of the pit, I risked one last glance back. Something was moving in the darkness of the spacecraft's interior, a shape coalescing out of the shadows. We had awakened something ancient, and it was not happy to see us. The tremor intensified, the ground beneath us heaving as if Charon itself was rejecting this intrusion. A gut-wrenching screech of metal filled the air. I turned to run, but a massive eruption of ice from the pit knocked me off my feet. I landed hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. As I struggled to regain my breath, I saw it, a monstrous form rising from the depths, towering over the dig site. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but far larger and more imposing than any human. Its skin was a translucent white, stretched taut over bulging muscles. Its head was extended, with a gaping orifice lined with sharp teeth. A wave of terror came over me, freezing my limbs. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. The creature surveyed the scene with eyes that burned like molten gold, its gaze sweeping over the fleeing workers. Then, with an ear-splitting shriek, it jumped. Its first victim was Griggs. The foreman had been too slow to react, and the creature snatched him up with a single, fluid motion. I watched in horror as Griggs was lifted into the air, his legs kicking futilely as the creature's mouth opened wide. A crunch pierced the night as Griggs disappeared into the abyss, his screams abruptly cut short. The creature turned its attention to the rest of us, its eyes blazing. I knew I had to act. Scrambling to my feet, I drew my sidearm and fired a shot at the creature's head. The bullet ricocheted off its thick skull, leaving only a shallow dent. The creature barely reacted, its focus fixed on the fleeing workers. I fired again, this time aiming for its chest. The bullet pierced its skin, leaving a trail of viscous, milky fluid. The creature screamed in pain and turned its attention to me, its eyes narrowing. I knew I was outmatched, but I couldn't just stand there and die. I emptied my magazine into the creature's torso, each bullet eliciting a scream of pain, but it wasn't enough. The creature advanced on me, its movements deceptively fast for its size. I threw my empty sidearm at its face and turned to run. My legs pumped, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear the creature's heavy footfalls behind me, its enraged roars filling the night. I stumbled over a chunk of ice and fell, the wind knocked out of me. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the taste of blood in my mouth. The creature loomed over me, its shadow blotting out the stars. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But the killing blow never came. Instead, I heard a series of sharp, explosive sounds followed by a gurgling cry. I opened my eyes to see the creature staggering backward, its chest riddled with holes. A figure emerged from the darkness, wielding a heavy-duty pulse rifle. It was one of the security officers, his face grim and determined. He fired another burst into the creature, sending it sprawling onto the ice. It twitched for a few moments, its limbs spasming, before finally falling still. The aftermath was a tableau of carnage. The harsh white light of the flood lamps illuminated the scene. The creature lay inert, a mountain of pale flesh and spilled viscera. Around it the ice was stained crimson. I staggered to my feet, my body aching from the fall. The security officer approached, his pulse rifle still smoking. His face was a mask of grim satisfaction. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'll live," I rasped, wiping a smear of blood from my chin. "We need to get the survivors back to base, and we need to seal that pit." He nodded curtly and barked orders into his comm unit. The remaining workers, their faces etched with shock and terror, began the task of gathering the wounded and retrieving the bodies of the fallen. I helped where I could, my mind numb with shock. Back at the base, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The survivors huddled together in the mess hall, their faces drawn and pale. The old man sat at the head of the table, his eyes sunken and his breathing labored. He looked like a ghost, a spectre of a man clinging to life by a thread. "Report," he croaked. I recounted the events at the dig site, the discovery of the spacecraft, the awakening of the creature, the slaughter. As I spoke, a murmur of fear and disbelief rippled through the mess hall. When I finished, the old man was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice surprisingly steady. "This changes everything," he said. "The company was right. There is something out there, something valuable, and we have found it." I had seen the horror firsthand, the raw violence of the creature we had encountered. But the old man's words hinted at a darker truth. The company didn't care about the lives lost, only the potential profit to be made. "What are your orders, sir?" I asked. The old man's eyes gleamed with a feverish light. "We proceed with caution," he said. "We study this creature, learn its secrets, and we find a way to exploit it." We had opened a Pandora's box, unleashed a nightmare upon this moon, and now we were going to try to tame it. The folly of it was staggering, but I knew there was no turning back. We were trapped on this frozen rock, at the mercy of forces beyond our comprehension, and our only hope of survival lay in the thing that threatened to destroy us. In the following days, we worked to secure the dig site, sealing the breach in the spacecraft's hull with plasteel plating and reinforcing the surrounding ice with structural supports. The creature's remains were hauled back to base and placed in a containment facility, a repurposed storage module outfitted with heavy-duty restraints and monitoring equipment. The science team, led by a wiry, bespectacled man named Dr. Brenner, descended upon the carcass like vultures, eager to dissect and analyze every inch of its alien anatomy. I watched from a distance, a knot of revulsion tightening in my gut. The creature had been a living being, a terrifying one to be sure, but still a living being. Now it was reduced to a specimen, a puzzle to be solved. The atmosphere in the base was one of tense anticipation. The old man had sequestered himself in his quarters, communicating only through terse, encrypted messages relayed by his aide. Rumors swirled through the ranks, whispers of corporate intrigue, of hidden agendas, of impending doom. I tried to focus on my duties, on maintaining order and discipline among the increasingly agitated workers. But the weight of the unknown pressed down on me, suffocating me. What other horrors lurked within the alien spacecraft? What would the company do with the knowledge we had unearthed? One evening, as I was making my rounds, I was summoned to the old man's quarters. I entered with a sense of foreboding, my hand hovering near my sidearm. The room was dark, the only illumination coming from the light of the monitor. The old man sat hunched in his chair, his face gaunt and drawn. "You wanted to see me, sir?" I asked. He gestured for me to come closer. "I've received a transmission from Earth," he said, his voice raspy. "The company is sending a team of specialists to investigate our discovery. They'll be arriving in 2 weeks." I felt a surge of both relief and apprehension. Help was on the way, but what kind of help? Would they bring weapons, soldiers, or would they bring scientists, eager to exploit the alien technology for their own nefarious purposes? "What are our orders, sir?" I asked. The old man's eyes glittered in the dark. "We prepare," he said. "We gather all the data we can on the creature, on the spacecraft. We make ourselves indispensable, and we wait." I nodded, understanding dawning on me. The old man was playing a dangerous game. A game of survival in a cutthroat corporate world. He was gambling on the hope that our discovery would be too valuable for the company to simply discard us. But I knew the risks. If we failed to deliver, we would be deemed expendable, sacrificed on the altar of profit. The days leading up to the arrival of the company's delegation were a flurry of preparation. The old man, invigorated by the promise of recognition and reward, micromanaged every detail, from the polishing of the base's tarnished metal surfaces to the meticulous arrangement of the specimens collected from the alien creature. I found myself increasingly drawn into the preparations, overseeing the security arrangements for the delegation's visit. We fortified the base's perimeter defenses, doubling the patrols and installing additional sentry turrets. The armory was restocked, and the security personnel were put through rigorous drills and simulations. Beneath the veneer of preparedness, however, a sense of unease permeated the base. The workers, still traumatized by the recent events, whispered amongst themselves, their fears fueled by the unknown nature of the visitors and the potential consequences of our discovery. On the day of the delegation's arrival, a black shuttle descended from the charcoal sky, its engines leaving contrails of vapor that hung in the frigid air like ghostly apparitions. I watched from the command center, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The shuttle touched down with a hiss of hydraulics, its landing gear leaving deep impressions in the ice. The hatch opened, releasing a blast of cold air and revealing a group of figures clad in white suits. They disembarked, their movements stiff and deliberate in the low gravity. The old man, dressed in his finest uniform, greeted them at the foot of the ramp. He shook hands with the lead figure, a tall, imposing man with a shaved head and piercing blue eyes. The rest of the delegation followed, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. I observed the exchange from a distance, noting the subtle power dynamics at play. The old man, despite his eagerness to please, still held himself with a measure of dignity. The delegation leader, on the other hand, exuded an air of cool detachment, his every gesture conveying a sense of authority and control. The visitors were escorted into the base. I followed at a discreet distance, my hand never straying far from my sidearm. The delegation's destination was the containment facility, where the remains of the alien creature awaited their scrutiny. As they entered the module, I could hear the hushed whispers of the scientists as they examined the specimen. I lingered outside, my senses alert. After a while, the delegation emerged, their faces unreadable behind their visors. The lead figure turned to the old man, his voice cold and measured. "This is most intriguing," he said. "We will need to conduct further analysis, of course, but the potential implications of this discovery are significant." The old man beamed, his hopes seemingly confirmed. The delegation's visit was filled with excitement and movement, noticeably different from the usual monotonous routine of the base. The scientists, accompanied by a phalanx of technicians and engineers, worked tirelessly, their movements precise and efficient. The containment facility buzzed with the sounds of whirring machinery and the muted conversations of the researchers, their voices distorted by their helmets' communication systems. I watched as they meticulously dissected the creature, extracting samples of tissue, fluid, and bone. They probed its alien anatomy with instruments, their faces obscured by protective masks. The old man accompanied the delegation on their every move, offering explanations and insights gleaned from our limited knowledge of the creature. He seemed to thrive in the spotlight, his earlier frailty forgotten as he basked in the attention of the company's representatives. Meanwhile, I continued my duties, maintaining a watchful eye on the visitors and ensuring the security of the base. The tension among the workers had not subsided, and I could sense their growing resentment towards the interlopers. The delegation's presence was a stark reminder of our precarious position, of our reliance on the whims of a distant corporate entity. One evening, as I was patrolling the perimeter, I noticed a figure standing alone near the edge of the ice sheet. It was Dr. Brenner, the lead scientist. He was staring out at the vast expanse of frozen wilderness, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching on the ice. He turned to face me, his eyes shadowed by the visor of his helmet. "A penny for your thoughts, Doctor?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice muffled by the helmet's speaker. "This creature, it's a biological paradox. Its cellular structure, its biochemistry, it's like nothing we've ever seen on Earth, in the labs, or even in our wildest theories." "That's what makes it so valuable," I said, repeating the old man's words. Brenner shook his head. "Value is a human construct," he said. "This creature is a force of nature, a primal entity. To try to control it, to exploit it, it's folly." His words struck a chord within me, resonating with my own unease. But I was a soldier, trained to follow orders, not to question them. "The company has its reasons," I said. Brenner let out a hollow laugh. "The company is driven by greed, by a thirst for power," he said. "They don't care about the consequences, about the potential dangers. They only see profit." I remained silent, unsure of how to respond. Brenner's words were a dangerous heresy, a challenge to the established order. But they also held a grain of truth, a truth that I had been trying to ignore. We stood there for a long moment, the silence broken only by the howling wind and the distant hum of the base's generators. Then Brenner turned back to the ice sheet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We are playing with fire," he said, "and I fear we will all be burned." A few days later, the tension in the base reached a fever pitch. The delegation, having completed their initial analysis, summoned the old man and me to a briefing in the command center. I entered the room with a sense of trepidation. The lead delegate, his face still hidden behind his visor, stood before a large holographic display, his fingers dancing across a control panel. The screen flashed to life, displaying a series of diagrams and graphs. "Our findings are extraordinary," the delegate began, his voice a monotone drone. "The creature you encountered is not simply an alien life form. It is a bioengineered weapon, a living embodiment of destruction." I exchanged a look with the old man, shock and morbid fascination on his face. The delegate continued, his voice rising in pitch. "The creature's cells are capable of rapid regeneration. Its tissues are impervious to most conventional weaponry, and its genetic code, it contains a vast library of knowledge, a blueprint for advanced technologies that could revolutionize our civilization." The old man's eyes gleamed with avarice. I, however, felt a growing sense of dread. The delegate's words confirmed my worst fears. This was not a scientific expedition. It was a military operation. The company had come not to study, but to weaponize. "We believe the spacecraft is a vessel for a much larger force," the delegate continued. "A force that could pose a significant threat to our interests in this sector. We must take immediate action to neutralize this threat." He turned to the old man, his voice cold and commanding. "We are requisitioning your base and all its resources. You and your personnel will be evacuated to a secure location. From this point forward, this operation is under the direct control of the company's military division." The old man opened his mouth to protest, but the delegate raised a hand, silencing him. "This is not a negotiation," he said. "This is an order. Failure to comply will be considered an act of treason against the company." The old man's face paled, but he lowered his head in submission. I felt a surge of anger, a desire to resist, to fight back, but I knew it was futile. The delegation left the command center. I turned to the old man. "What now?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes filled with resignation and defiance. "We survive," he said. "We bide our time. And we pray that we haven't unleashed a monster we can't control." The days following the delegation's announcement were filled with dramatic transformations. The base was transformed into a military encampment, with armed guards patrolling the corridors and armored vehicles rumbling across the ice. The remaining miners and technicians were herded into cramped living quarters, their movements restricted and their communication monitored. I, along with a handful of other security personnel, was assigned to assist the military in their operations. We were issued new uniforms, emblazoned with the company's insignia, and given access to advanced weaponry and tactical gear. Under the direction of a stern-faced colonel named Richards, we began a series of intensive training exercises, familiarizing ourselves with the new equipment and practicing combat drills in the harsh Coronian environment. Richards was a man of few words, his orders delivered in a clipped, authoritative tone. He viewed us with disdain and suspicion, clearly considering us to be little more than expendable assets. The old man, stripped of his authority, retreated into seclusion. I caught glimpses of him from time to time, his once proud figure now stooped and frail. He seemed to have aged years in a matter of days, his spirit broken by the company's betrayal. One evening, as I was returning from a training exercise, I spotted him standing alone on the observation deck, staring out at the alien spacecraft. I hesitated for a moment, then approached him. "Sir?" I said, my voice hesitant. He turned to face me, his eyes hollow and haunted. "It's all gone," he whispered. "Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, it's all been taken from us." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a pang of sympathy. "It's not over yet, sir," I said. "We're still here. We can still fight." He shook his head. "The fight is lost before it's even begun," he said. "The company has its claws in us now. They'll never let go." He turned back to the window, his gaze fixed on the spacecraft. "That thing out there. It's a monster," he said. "And we've awakened it." I knew he was right. The creature we had encountered was just a harbinger of things to come. The company, in its arrogance and greed, had unleashed a force that it could not control. The first sign that something was amiss came in the form of a hushed conversation I overheard between two technicians in the mess hall. They were discussing a colleague, a burly engineer named Donovan, who had been acting strangely. He had become withdrawn, his appetite had vanished, and he complained of persistent headaches. I dismissed it as stress, a natural reaction to the upheaval we were experiencing. But the following day, Donovan disappeared. A search of the base turned up nothing, and the incident was quickly swept under the rug by the military, attributed to a possible accident or desertion. The next occurrence was more unsettling. One of the security officers on night patrol reported seeing a figure moving in the shadows near the containment facility. When he approached, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a faint, acrid odor. The reports continued to trickle in, each more bizarre than the last. A scientist claimed to have seen a strange, glowing substance oozing from the creature's remains. Another worker reported hearing strange noises emanating from the ventilation shafts. I began to suspect that something sinister was afoot. I requested access to the containment facility, but my request was denied by Colonel Richards. He dismissed my concerns, attributing them to paranoia and stress. But I knew in my gut that something was wrong, something far more insidious than we could imagine. One night, as I lay in my bunk, I was awakened by a muffled scream. I grabbed my sidearm and rushed out into the corridor. The sound had come from the direction of the medical bay. As I approached, I could hear the sounds of a struggle, of flesh tearing and bones snapping. I burst through the door, my weapon drawn. The scene that greeted me was one of pure horror. Dr. Brenner, the lead scientist, lay on the floor, his body contorted in an impossible position. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. Standing over him was a monstrous figure, its body an amalgamation of human and alien features. Its skin was a sickly green, its limbs twisted. Its face was a mask of pain and rage, its mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. It turned to face me, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. I raised my weapon and fired, but the bullet seemed to have little effect. The creature let out a piercing shriek and lunged at me. I dodged its attack and fired again, this time aiming for its head. The bullet struck its forehead, but instead of killing it, the creature's head split open, revealing a writhing mass of tentacles. The tentacles lashed out, wrapping around my arms and legs, pulling me towards the creature's mouth. I struggled desperately, but the creature's grip was too strong. As I was dragged closer, I could feel its hot, fetid breath on my face. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate. But then, a bright light filled my vision. I opened my eyes to see the creature recoiling, its tentacles shriveling and retracting. A figure stood between us, wielding a weapon that crackled with energy. It was the old man. He fired another blast from the weapon, and the creature let out a wail of agony before collapsing to the floor, its body dissolving into a pool of viscous fluid. The old man lowered the energy weapon, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We need to alert the others," he said, his voice barely audible above the hum of the medical bay's life support systems. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "The military," I said. "They need to know what's happening." We rushed out of the medical bay, the stench of blood and viscera clinging to our clothes. The corridors were eerily silent, the only sound the rhythmic thump of our boots on the metal grating. As we reached the command center, a wave of alarm washed over me. The doors were sealed shut, the security panel dark. I pounded on the metal, my voice rising in panic. "Open up! It's me!" Silence. The old man pulled a small device from his pocket, a jury-rigged hacking tool fashioned from spare parts. He inserted it into the security panel, his fingers flying across the keypad. The panel beeped, and the doors slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. We rushed inside, guns drawn. The command center was deserted, the monitors blank. The only sound was the steady drip of condensation from the ceiling. A sense of dread settled over me. We were alone. Suddenly the intercom came to life. A voice, distorted and inhuman, filled the room. "Welcome, intruders," it hissed. "You have awakened us from our slumber. Now you will pay the price." The lights went out, plunging the command center into darkness. I heard the old man curse under his breath as he fumbled for a flashlight. A moment later, a beam of light pierced the gloom, revealing the source of the voice. It was a monstrous creature, its body a writhing mass of tentacles and claws. It slithered across the ceiling, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The old man fired a blast from his energy weapon, but the creature dodged it with ease. It lunged at us, its tentacles lashing out like whips. I fired my sidearm, the bullets ricocheting off its leathery hide. The old man was knocked to the ground, his weapon skittering across the floor. The creature turned its attention to him, its jaws dripping with venomous saliva. I lunged forward, tackling the creature to the ground. We rolled across the floor, a tangle of limbs and tentacles. I managed to grab hold of the energy weapon and fired at point-blank range. The blast struck the creature's head, causing it to convulse and shriek in agony. I scrambled away, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature lay still, its body smoking and charred. I turned to the old man, who was slowly getting to his feet. "Are you all right, sir?" I asked. He nodded, his face pale. "We need to warn the military," he said. "This is just the beginning." The urgency in his voice spurred me into action, and we raced towards the barracks. As we approached, a chilling silence replaced the usual clamor of activity. We burst through the barrack doors, guns raised, ready for a fight. The sight that greeted us froze the blood in my veins. The barracks were a scene of utter carnage. Soldiers lay sprawled across the floor, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions. Blood pooled around them, staining the white walls and floor a gruesome crimson. The old man let out a strangled cry, his eyes wide with horror. I felt bile rising in my throat, a wave of nausea threatening to overwhelm me. We moved through the room, our boots squelching in the gore. Each step revealed more bodies, each more mangled than the last. Some had been torn limb from limb, their viscera strewn across the floor. Others bore strange wounds, as if something had burst out from within. The few faces that remained recognizable were twisted in masks of terror, their eyes wide and staring. We reached the far end of the barracks where a group of soldiers had made a last stand. They were huddled together, their weapons still clutched in their lifeless hands. Their bodies were riddled with wounds, their uniforms soaked in blood. The old man sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood over him, my mind reeling. The creatures had gotten to them. They had slaughtered the soldiers, leaving no survivors. The realization hit me. We were alone. The company's forces, our supposed saviors, were gone. We were trapped on this forsaken moon, at the mercy of an enemy we didn't understand. A surge of adrenaline propelled me back into action. I grabbed the old man by the arm, hauling him to his feet. "We have to go," I said, my voice rough with urgency. "We have to warn the others." We sprinted through the corridors, the metallic clang of our boots piercing the silence. We found the remaining miners and technicians huddled in the mess hall, their faces etched with fear. The old man relayed the grim news of the military's demise and the imminent threat we faced. A wave of panic came over the crowd, their murmurs rising to a crescendo of despair. Silence! I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. Panic will get us killed. We need to organize, to fight back. My words had a sobering effect. The murmurs died down, replaced by a tense silence. I saw a desperate yearning for leadership in the face of impending doom. We quickly devised a plan. The miners, armed with improvised weapons fashioned from tools and scrap metal, would fortify the mess hall, turning it into a stronghold. The technicians, meanwhile, would work on restoring communication with Earth, hoping to send out a distress signal. I, along with the old man and a few other able-bodied men, would venture into the heart of the base, seeking out the source of the infestation and gathering whatever intelligence we could. It was a suicide mission, but we had no other choice. We armed ourselves with whatever weapons we could find: pulse rifles, plasma torches, even a few antique shotguns. We checked our suits for leaks, ensuring the seals were tight against the corrosive atmosphere outside. Then, with a deep breath, we stepped out into the corridors. The air was heavy with a cloying, sweet odor, like rotting fruit. We moved cautiously, our senses on high alert. The base was a maze of twisting corridors and dark rooms, each corner a potential ambush point. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, playing tricks on our eyes. We reached the containment facility, the epicenter of the infestation. The door was ajar, the security panel smashed. I exchanged a look with the old man, a silent acknowledgement of the danger we faced. Then, with weapons raised, we stepped inside. The sight that greeted us was one of unspeakable horror. The creature's remains were no longer inert. They had transformed into a mass of flesh and tentacles. The creature's spawn, dozens of them, scuttled across the floor and walls, their eyes gleaming. They were smaller than their progenitor, but no less terrifying. We opened fire, the sounds of our weapons filling the enclosed space. The creatures shrieked and writhed, their bodies erupting in showers of gore. But for everyone we killed, 2 more seemed to take its place. We were losing ground, the sheer number of creatures overwhelming us. I felt a sharp pain in my leg as a clawed limb raked across my thigh. I stumbled, falling to my knees. The old man, seeing my predicament, rushed to my aid. He blasted a path through the creatures, his energy weapons spitting bolts of searing energy. He reached my side, his face grim and determined. "We have to get out of here!" he shouted over the din. I nodded, struggling to my feet. We turned to flee, but it was too late. The creatures had surrounded us, their tentacles reaching out to ensnare us. The creatures swarmed over us. I raised my arms, trying in vain to shield myself from their onslaught. A searing pain shot through my shoulder as one of them sank its teeth into my flesh. I screamed, my voice raw with terror and agony. The old man fought beside me, his energy weapon spitting bolts of blue light that sizzled and popped against the creature's chitinous hides. But they were too many. They pulled him down, their bodies wriggling over his, tearing at his clothes, his flesh. I watched in horror as they consumed him, their jaws working with sickening efficiency. His screams were quickly muffled, replaced by wet, tearing sounds that made my stomach heave. I knew I was next. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end, but instead of pain, I felt a sudden release, a weight lifted from my body. I opened my eyes to see the creatures retreating, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Then I saw it. A translucent membrane had spread across the floor and walls of the containment facility, engulfing the creatures in its embrace. They thrashed and writhed, but the membrane held firm, slowly constricting around them. One by one, the creatures succumbed, their bodies dissolving into a viscous goo that was absorbed by the membrane. The air filled with a sweet odor, like rotting meat. I watched in stunned silence as the membrane continued to spread, consuming everything in its path. It flowed over the walls, the ceiling, the equipment, the remains of the old man. It was as if the base itself was being devoured from within. I staggered back, my legs weak with terror. I knew I had to escape to get as far away from this place as possible. I stumbled through the corridors, my wounded leg throbbing with every step. The base was a ghost town, the silence broken only by the dripping of condensation and the distant hum of the failing generators. I reached the airlock, slamming the inner door shut behind me. I initiated the evacuation sequence, the outer door sliding open with a grinding sound. I looked back at the structure, its windows glowing with an eerie light. I knew I would never see it again. I turned and ran, my lungs burning. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I ran until I collapsed. My body spent. I lay on the ice, staring up at the starry sky. The cold seeped into my bones, numbing the pain. As I drifted into unconsciousness, I had one final thought. The company had come to Charon seeking profit, but they had found only death. And now death was spreading, consuming everything in its path. There would be no rescue, no salvation, only the cold, dark void of space and the endless silence of the grave.